The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Donna Will. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator for Central Maryland Regional Office. And today is the webinar on DDA cost reports. So our presenters for today are Ron Peel, who is the DDA Finance Director. And from the fiscal unit, we also have Levita S. Johnson and Alphonsus Aguama. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants will be in listen-only mode. There are two options for listening to the webinar, by computer and by phone. If you have trouble hearing, you may try switching by clicking on the appropriate button on the webinar panel. There are handouts for this webinar, and you can find them in the handout section of the panel to your right on the screen. They can also be available in an email, and we will be recording the webinar, and we'll send a follow-up email to everyone who registered, and that'll go out tomorrow. So anyone who didn't see it or anyone that wants to review it again can do so. Questions can be typed in the question box panel. However, we're going to answer questions at the end of the presentation to avoid repetition. If you have any additional questions, we're going to have a dedicated email address for questions, and I'll type that to everyone in a moment. All right, so we're ready to go. So now I'd like to introduce Ron Peel, the Finance Director. Hi, Ron. How are you?
Just fine. Thank you, Donna. Good morning, everyone. Again, thank you for participating in this, our first ever cost reports training webinar. There are a couple of things I'd like to say at the outset before we actually get into the slides. We really want to emphasize that this is the first time we're doing this, but we kind of came to this decision around a couple of common things that we were noticing with our cost reports process. So we thought doing this type of training webinar will kind of help us to address some of the recurring common issues that we heard and some of the response and feedback we were receiving from providers. So this is kind of like the basis for us doing this for the first time. And please bear with us. This is the first time, and we will tweak it and probably fine tune it going forward in the future as we go forward in this process. So with that, basically, I want to run through. We got about 25 or so slides, and we want to run through the slides. The first part of which, I just want to talk about some common objectives and purpose of the webinar, the objectives in terms of why we're doing this, and then the other fiscal team, Alphonsus, will walk through some of the submission criteria and make sure that everybody's clear and understand what we're looking for in terms of the cost report submission, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with walking through the actual templates, which obviously is important because we want to make sure that everybody, as you're looking at the templates, you understand what information is being requested and why the information is really pertinent to this process. So to begin with, the purpose of this webinar, as I kind of alluded to before, is to really kind of help train you, the providers, on basically how to do the cost report, how to do the cost report that is compliant, which is critical to our process. And secondly, we like to spend the second half of this training to really entertain any questions you have, some of which we will answer during this process. And I think you've been provided, or you will be provided, with a link to an email account where you can send questions in after this presentation as well. So training objectives, basically 4 training objectives. Again, we want to highlight the regulatory and legal requirements. Many of you are probably already aware of this, but we thought it was important enough to just kind of mention and re-emphasize the legal and regulatory requirements for the cost report. And secondly, to kind of review the purpose of the cost report. Why do we have to do it? What is the basic premise of it, you know, for reconciling expenditures and revenues. We'll get more into that as we go further. And thirdly, to review submission criteria. This is important because this is kind of the first part of our process when we're reviewing cost reports. You know, we're checking to make sure that everything that's required is being submitted in your package. So Alphonsus is going to walk through some of those slides just to emphasize what those criteria are. And lastly, and certainly most important, is to walk through the components of the cost report submission criteria. That's in the back where we have the forms to show you how to fill out the various schedules and what they mean, and so on and so forth. So by way of introduction, who is required to complete a cost report? So the cost report is only required to be submitted by private providers of our fee payment system or FPS services. Now, those who are excluded include local health departments, CCS providers, and microboards do not have to submit cost reports. Just wanted to make that clear at the outset. As I mentioned before, the regulatory and legal requirements, as you see at the top there, there's 2 COMAR requirements, and then there's the actual statute, Health General Article, Section 7-306-1. And so basically, as you are aware, our cost report covers what we call the basic essential FPS services, which include residential, day, community learning services, supported employment, employment discovery and customization, and lastly, personal support. Point of emphasis, cost reports must be submitted no later than 6 months after the end of the fiscal year, which is December the 31st. Now, I know you're thinking that for our FY17 cost reports, we have a due date that is actually January the 2nd, but as is explained in the instructions, because of the holidays, the way the holidays fall, you know, New Year's holiday falls, we actually are requiring those cost reports to be into DDA by January the 2nd, 2018. Last point of emphasis on this slide, failure to comply permits DDA to impose a penalty of up to $500 per day, of course, after notice and an opportunity to request a hearing has been provided to providers. This is not anything that I'm sure you guys are not aware of or haven't heard before, but just wanted to cite that this is all based on statutory and regulatory requirements. The purpose of the cost report, there are 3 essential purposes of why you're required to do the cost report. The first is to document the provider's audited and accrued expenditures and revenue for fiscal year 2017, which is from July the 1st, 2016 through June the 30th, 2017. The cost report must be based upon the provider's audited financial statement prepared on an accrual basis and in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP principles. And thirdly, the cost report must contain a certification by an independent certified public accountant for the individual client fees that should have been collected, and also for the actual attendance days as reported in your cost report. Now with that, so that's kind of like the backdrop, the information. What I'd like to do now is to turn it over to Alphonsus, as I said, who's going to kind of walk through some of the submission information and the criteria that we're using as we evaluate your cost report.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Halloween. My name is Alphonsus Ogama. Many of you may have contacted me for the FY16 cost report. Mr. Rumpy has covered the purpose of the webinar and the training objectives, introduction, the legal requirements, and purpose of the cost report. So I want to continue the presentation with the submission information. What we require providers to do is to submit the documents that we use to verify your compliance. The first is that you send the DDA cost report data form. That is what have to be used. We need these 2 copies, one in Excel and one in PDF version. The cover page of the cost report must be signed by the administrator on the PDF version. If you have a preparer, you have somebody who prepared it, that preparer must sign, if you're different from the administrator. We also need audited financial statements on the state fiscal year that begins from July 1, 2016 to June 30, 2017. We need this in PDF format. And all supplement statements. The audited financial statement and attestation, also, we need that in PDF format. There are those of you that submit the financial statement in an annual basis. Those must include explanations and the schedules to help us tie those financial statements to the cost report. If you do that, you have to also give us some schedules or explanations. Last year, we have accommodated those who did not follow the state fiscal year. But this year, we want you to comply with the instruction and make sure your statement adheres to the state fiscal year. I want Mr. Steele to make a comment about this, whether we're going to accommodate it this year or not.
Okay, thank you, Alphonsus. So, as Alphonsus has said, we recognize that there are a few of our providers that who actually do financial statements on a calendar year basis, and that's been sort of a challenge for both DDA as well as providers. But just so you'll understand, we'll do what we can to work with you to try to comply, but the statute gives us no wiggle room on that in that regard. The cost report, the financial statements actually have to comply with and be submitted on a fiscal year basis, as we spelled out, which runs from July the 1st for us through June 30. And we're willing to talk to you about how you can match that up to our fiscal year in terms of matching 2 6-month periods or whatever the case might be, but we can't waver on that requirement because it's mandated in statute. I just wanted to emphasize that point before you go forward.
Okay, one other thing about your submission. We found that few providers, when they submit their documents, they put all the documents in one file when they scan it. Please, we want you to make sure that you send them in separate files, because it makes it difficult for us when we are reviewing it. We have to drop each file on a separate folder. So please, each of the documents, you have to send them on a separate file. Also, this is what we look at when we review your cost report. We check to make sure that the PCI2 attendance in your cost report agrees, with what we have in the PCIs. We also look to make sure that total expenditure and total revenue on Schedule F of the cost report agrees with the audited financial statement. We also looked to make sure that the attendance data is provided in the cost report. We also check to make sure that the attendance data provided in the attestation. We also look to make sure that the attendance in cost report agrees with the attestation. We also make sure that the PCI2 attendance in cost report agrees with the data in PCI2. If that does not agree, we check to make sure that Schedule G is filled out to explain the difference. Okay, also regarding the client fee, the contribution to car and room and board, we verify or confirm that the client fee CTC data is provided in the cost report. We also check to make sure that the client fee data is provided in the attestation. And we check also that the CTC in cost report agrees with what you have in the attestation. The other thing we check is to make sure that the PCI2 cost report reported in your cost, PCI2 cost fee, client fee, reported in your cost report agrees with PCI2. If that is not agreed, we should make sure that you completed Schedule H. The other thing we look at is Schedule I, which records if there's any reimbursement made. This is rarely completed, but if you need it, this will be explained further by Levita in her presentation, in case you might need it. So right now, I'll hand over to Levita to continue to walk you through the schedules and explain how to complete them. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Levita, and I'm sure I've spoken with most of you regarding your cost reports. We'll take this time this morning to walk through what a compliant cost report looks like. As it was mentioned earlier, you must submit the cost report in both Excel and PDF with the cover sheet signed on the PDF copy. On the left side of the screen is my cursor. Oh, I can't. Oh, there it is. I can't see it on my computer screen now. On the left side of the screen is a copy of the Excel cover sheet. We require all information to be completed: the company name, the address, the contact person, telephone number, and email address. We also ask for an alternate contact, which differs from the primary contact. As far as the phone number is concerned, we do ask for a viable or valid, I should say, phone number with extension. Excuse me. Between us here at the DDA and DCAR, there are times when the phone numbers provided aren't the best numbers to reach someone. We tend to get looped in voice recordings or just a valid or voicemail box. We ask that your email addresses are valid email addresses, as we send emails sometimes and you all don't receive them, or they bounce back. At the bottom of this cost report, on the right side of your screen, we ask that we receive the printed name of the officer and administrator and their signature. And as stated before, if someone other than the officer or administrator completes this cost report, we ask for their signature. Residential service. There are seven FPS services we'll cover today. Each Excel tab requires the same information with respect to that service. We'll begin with residential service. To the left of the screen is what an actual cost report data form looks like. In section 1, we ask that you report all operating expenses related to residential services. In section 2, it's divided by PCIS-2 attendance and provider attendance. You would take the PCIS-2 attendance from PCIS-2 up here and enter the attendance days in the appropriate cells with the total payable days equaling the total number of payable days in PCIS, which is this line right here. So this line right here should match these attendance days right here. To find this information, you will click on the Reports tab here. In PCIS-2, report categories, select attendance, would be available reports for attendance summary. I know it's probably hard to read. By quarter, your provider name, the service, and the fiscal year. And in this case, that would be 2017. As for the provider attendance, which is here, that would come directly from your attestation. So you would take these numbers here, your attendance days out of your attestation, and plug them in here for the fee payment system payable days here. At times, PCIS-2 total payable days are not congruent to the number of provider attendance days, resulting in a variance. You will see a 46-day variance that will need to be explained on Schedule G. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Day habilitation service. For day service, you will complete the cost data form in the same way you did as the residential data form. The only difference would be to change the service type here in PCIS to day service. In this case, you will see there's an attendance variance of 16 days between PCIS-2 attendance and the provider attendance. And just a reminder, all of this information needs to be completed. Currently, mine's blank, but you will need to complete it. There are some fields that will automatically calculate. Community learning service. Same idea here. Enter operating expenses here at the top left. Take the PCIS-2 attendance directly from PCIS-2. The provider attendance days are taken directly from the attestation here. And notice here, we do not have a variance in attendance days. So the attendance days in PCIS match the attendance days in your attestation. Supported employment, all things remain the same. However, the provider only provided services in the fourth quarter of the fiscal year, which is fine. You can only report information for the quarter's services were provided. Attendance days here from the provider, match what's here. Here you will see the provider did not have any attendance in PCIS 2 or provided the service, which is also fine. So this page would remain blank. We do ask that you submit the page, but it will remain blank. Personal supports. The concept remains the same, but unlike the other services, personal supports reports attendance days in hours. So you would calculate your hours here, pull them directly from pieces. You will report them in hours here from your attestation onto your cost report. This is you done with all the other services. Schedule E, other expenses. If you cannot find a specific line item that coincides with your records, use the schedule to list the type of expenses and the amounts that support the expenses. Schedule E is broken down into 6 sections, A through D, which is just a reflection of all of the services, FPS services. Each section has a table that corresponds to the FPS service schedule and tab. Please place expenses and the amounts in the schedule corresponding to the specific service. The totals of the other expenses will automatically populate in the main classification of expenses in Section 1 of tabs A through D. Schedule F, net operating income. This schedule will be used to measure net operating income for DDA services and to reconcile revenues and expenses with your audited financial statements. So your total revenues, I'm looking at the screen correctly, would be here, and your total expenses here. Now, as Alphonsus mentioned before, in some cases, your revenues and expenses may not match what's in your financials. And we do request that you complete this text box that is generally sitting at the bottom of this cost data form. We ask that you explain explicitly, in explicit detail, how the revenues and expenses tie. This text box is provided if the total revenue and or total expenses reported on the cost report do not reconcile with the total revenue and or total expenses reported in the audited financial statements. If the total revenue and expenses number in the cost report do not equal the revenue and expenses number in the audited financial statement, but the addition or subtraction of the other revenues or expenses does reconcile the numbers, then this calculation needs to be explained in this section. Your cost report will be considered non-compliant if a clear explanation is not provided tying revenues to expenses, subjecting your agency to fines not to exceed $500 a day. And you may supply any supporting documentation along with the explanation to your financials. Here in the top of the revenue box is CTC. CTC is applicable to residential service providers only. The provider should list the actual collections from individuals' contribution to cost of care for residential program. This amount should be certified by a CPA firm. An independent CPA must attest to the client fees. The attestation. This is the template of an attestation that we supply you on the DDA website and should be used. A CPA must attest to the provider's client attendance data and client fees. CPAs must examine the accompanying statements of client attendance days and client fees of the provider agency for the state fiscal year. The statements of client attendance data and client fees are the responsibility of the provider agency. The responsibility of the auditor is to express an opinion on these statements based on their examination. The attestation should also include actual collections of CTC from individuals and room and board. Actual collections should not be confused with expected contributions as reported in PCIS-2. Expected contributions is the amount that DDA expects you to collect as recorded in PCIS, while actual collections is the amount you actually collected. So here in the top of the screen is the actual collections of CTC only. This does not include room and board. However, in your attestation, you will explain or provide us with the information on what you collected for CTC as well as what you collected for room and board. Schedule G, the attendance reconciliation. We spoke about this a little earlier. This schedule is used only if there is a variance between payable days reported in PCIS-2 and payable days in the provider record. If there is no difference between the PCIS-2 payable days and the payable days in the provider record, then this section does not need to be completed. To process the reconciliation of the attendance data, an explanation of the variance should be reported here. If the total of PCIS-2 payable days is less than the total of payable days reported in the provider attendance records, then the provider will need to explain each difference in attendance to be reimbursed. A provider may not be reimbursed for any differences that are unexplained. If the total of PCIS-2 payable days is more than the total of payable days reported in the provider attendance records, then the provider will also need to explain each difference. The difference in attendance will be recouped by the DDA. Error update reports must be submitted during the reconciliation process in order for providers to get paid if attendance records indicate the provider owes money to the provider. I'm sorry, the DDA owes money to the provider. For the columns here, I believe this is service. For column service, PCIS-2 attendance category and actual attendance category, there is a drop-down list in the cell that provides all the categories. You can access this list by first clicking on the cell and then clicking on the down arrow, which unfortunately I'm able to demonstrate. These drop-downs are used to correctly report the service and attendance classification. So as you saw earlier, we had several days, we had a variance in the day service, and we had a variance in the residential service, which totaled a variance of 62 days. Therefore, you must have 62 entries on Schedule G with 62 explanations. DCAR reconciles by day. Therefore, you need to explain by day. You cannot lump these by month or by week. So if you have 200-day variance, then you need to have 200 entries on Schedule G. PCIS 2, I'm sorry, CTC. So we're going to discuss Schedule H, Contribution to Care. And to get to that screen, you must go to, choose Earned Payment, under Payments, you would choose Earned Payment Details under the report type, choose Residential Service type, Provider Agency, type the fiscal year, summarize, click the Summarize box here, and then Submit Query. And that will bring you to the CTC, which is reported here in the bottom right of your screen. Residential service agencies must provide information on contribution of care. A provider agency must report the total contribution of care calculated in PCIS 2 and individualized information on the collection of those fees. The annual expected contribution to care for all individuals in your agency can be located on the previous page that we discussed here. So this number that you have here in PCIS 2 for a total contribution to care gets reported here, where it says total contribution in PCIS 2. This figure here, which is total CTC from actual collections, is taken directly from Schedule F. So it populates it here. This formula is here to calculate, to do the calculation for you. This total must match. If the total does not match, you must complete the body of Schedule H per individual. As stated in the Contribution to Care guidance, no other formula may be used to calculate cost of care other than what is outlined in DDA's Federal Waiver Program, which is a formula used in the PCIS-2 CTC form. If a provider has reported payments from an individual that exceeds the individual's PCIS-2 CTC form, then those funds may only represent corrections to provider errors in the PCIS-2 CTC form. If the CTC form is correct and the provider still obtain more collections from the individual, then the provider should not input that information on Schedule H and must immediately return the excess funds to the individual. Schedule I. If a provider received payment for room and board invoices from the DDA for uncollectible room and board fees, then the provider must report on an individual basis the annual reimbursement from DDA and the total unpaid amount from the individual, including invoices to the DDA as of the end of the fiscal year. And in most cases, this form will remain blank. I know in some cases, providers have had trouble collecting CTC from the individual and has reached out wanting to understand how can they become the rep payee. And we ask that you contact Social Security Administration to apply to become the rep payee. We do provide you with that link at the end of this presentation.
Thank you, Levita. So Schedule J there's nothing you need to do on Schedule J. Schedule J automatically populates from the data you enter in those various tabs that Levita ran through on the specific services, residential day, CLS, SE, and EDC, and personal support. That data that you fill out in those forms automatically populates to Schedule J. Schedule J essentially is the wage information. It calculates the percent of your operating expenses directly attributable to direct care staff wages. And as you know, you all are required to do a wage survey. We take the data from this, your cost report here, and use it, as you fill out your wage survey to do the comparisons that we're required to do. So there's really nothing more you need to do as far as Schedule J is concerned. So that essentially, we walk through the form, that kind of essentially concludes the presentation. A couple of things before I close it out with the last slide. So I just wanted to say, so if some of this information seems redundant and repetitive at times, just bear with us, because some of these things we notice as we're going through our review process are kind of recurring issues that we have year in and year out with cost reports. Just basic, not proper signatures, lacking signatures, a form out of place here or there, or not just missing a piece of information. So some of it may have been a little repetitive throughout the slides, but we just beg your indulgence on that, because as I said before, a missing signature can be something as important as keeping your cost report from being compliant. So we just wanted to make sure that we covered everything, and some of it might have been repetitive or, from one slide to the next, but just wanted to put that out there. Also, I wanted to also emphasize that for FY16, we think we've had a measure of success with our cost reports process, as we probably only have like a handful left to completely reconcile. So we're hoping that with that, what we've experienced in 16, and then doing this webinar here, it will generate some questions, or answer a lot of questions actually. And like I said, if there are things that you encounter along the way, you have the website where you can dial into and give those questions, and we will certainly do our best to respond as timely as possible. And the only other thing I would emphasize about 17, the big difference, of course, is that we don't have CSLA in 17, as that was completely phased out in FY16. So you'll notice that there is no tab or anything for CSLA. Before I go to the closing slide, I think Alphonsus had something else that he wanted to add to this discussion.
Yes, the only thing I want to add is that a lot of or many providers don't read the instructions. If you read the instructions and follow the instructions, you will do a better job. Please read the instructions and follow the instruction. The instruction is very specific on how to complete this course report. So if you read the instructions and follow it, you will be able to do a good report.
Okay. So with that, so lastly, just a few bullet points to close out. So please remember to include your agency name in the subject line when emailing all cost report information. I think we covered that early in the presentation, but like I said, some of this stuff is very basic stuff, but it can keep your cost report from being compliant if it's not filled in. Secondly, all cost report correspondence should be emailed to the DDA email address, which is dda.reconciliations@maryland.gov. DDA requires providers to continually update all contact information. Again, this was mentioned before, but this should be done by way of our regional offices, because if it's not, again, it will keep your cost report, everything else being equal, it can keep your cost report from being compliant, just for lack of having basic contact information in there. As Vita just mentioned, Social Security Administration representative payee information can be found at https:// www.ssa.gov/pay/become.htm, or call the information that's listed there, the 1-800 number, and so you can find that information at that particular link there and phone number.
Hey, Ron?
Eligibility.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. We had a few questions. And it didn't mean to go out of turn here.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
we just had like 3 questions. Could you answer those?
Sure. Let's stop for the okay.
Okay. This is the first year that my staff and I will be preparing the cost report. How do we find out who our administrator is?
I'm not sure about the administrator for the agency, the provider agency. Is that the question? I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think maybe it's, I don't know, if the person who asked the question can provide a little more detail about that, we can.
Well, that refers to whoever the administrator within the provider agency is, whoever their CEO or the contact or the executive director, CEO of the provider agency. That's what we're referring to there. Yeah. Yeah, the main contact person who's,
Whoever is responsible for this.
Yeah, sign off on the company. It could be the CEO.
Okay. So the calendar year audit report will be accepted. However, we must reconcile the calendar year audit report to the fiscal year cost report with reconciliation worksheets, correct?
No, that's not correct.
Not correct.
The cost report has to comply with fiscal year, which is for FY17, is for June 1, 2016 through July 1, 2016 through June 30, 2017. Right. That's the time frame that their financial statement has to match to. Okay. However they do that is entirely up to them. They can match periods, take fiscal periods from their calendar year and match it to that fiscal year, but we can't do anything outside those. We're bound by that date, by statute, the fiscal year. Okay?
Okay, we have another question. If there is a difference in hours for personal supports and an error update was sent in after the deadline of August 31st, because it was discovered once the second quarter was available in PCIS 2, should these error updates be attached to the submission of the cost report?
Well, but they still, they have to submit the error updates because that's documentation. We need all documentation as we're closing this process out. So yes, they need to submit and attach those to the submission because that's how we reconcile. We need documentation.
I have a quick question. I always get confused between CTC, client fees, and room and board. And I think the person said later that they don't really know conceptually what they mean. Do you have?
So I'm going to let Navita say they get confused between client fees, CTC, and room and board in terms of what they mean. So room and board is just what it is, right? It's room and board.
It's $12.33 a day. So that's the room and board that each individual pays per day for residential service.
Wow.
Yeah. So CTC is a deduction from your quarterly payment, which is determined by the Eligibility Determination Division. They send out letters to the providers or the rep payee, the individual, informing them of what their contribution to care should be. We deduct it from the quarterly payment, but it's the responsibility of the provider to recoup that from the individual.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
We'll find out in a little bit. Okay. We have another question. The 2017 cost report does not appear to be able to enter 2017 dates for attendance differences with PCIS2. You can only enter 2016 and before. Do you know when we will have a template where we can enter FY17 dates?
I'm not sure what that means. FY17 dates.
The 2017 cost report is on the website.
Okay. If people have further questions, they can use the email, the dedicated email address.
Correct.
Okay.
Let's see. There's, as we go along, people have more questions. So, person
and
says,
what I'd like them to do, if you're sending a question about a cost report, or if it's a cost report, whatever your topic or question is, please indicate that in the subject line. So if it's a cost report and information you're sending regarding the cost report, indicate your agency name in the subject line. If it's a question about the cost report, please say question about cost report or something, because we get so many inquiries in that email inbox, and it's hard to separate all of that information. We get wage surveys in there, we get financial incident reports in there, we get cost reports, resubmitted cost reports. So we need you to use the email box, but we need you to indicate your subject matter in the subject line, please.
That's very helpful. Let's see. The cost report must be done on the fiscal year. I understand that, but my organization is on the calendar year. The audit report will be done on the calendar year, and we will do the cost report on the fiscal year. However, we must submit reconciliation worksheets that reconciles our audit reports to the fiscal year cost report. Did I read that one? I'm sorry. It sounded like
I think so.
Okay.
It sounds like
all right.
A version of it.
Let's go on to the next one. Room and board collection is $375 max for provider, but PCIS2 allows it to be over the $375 amount. So you subtract more from our payment than we are allowed to collect.
That's
That
what,
may
For room
need
and
to be
board,
a
you
question.
can't collect any more than $375 for room and board.
yeah.
Okay. If error reports were submitted after August 31st to DDA, should those also be attached to the cost report for documentation of the differences?
Because they're going to be reconciled. It's just after 31st. So after August 31st is our cutoff for stuff to be processed through our normal quarterly payment process. So when it kicks into year-end reconciliation, DCAR, they should have documentation to support any differences in attendance. They got to have documentation, as I said before.
The person had asked a question before, asked if CTC is the same thing as client fees. What does CTC stand for?
The contribution of care. They're contributing to their cost of care.
Is that the same thing as client fees, or is that different?
Well, they're all client fees because they're paying a fee, but there's contribution of care, and then there's room and board. So they're two separate fees.
Okay.
One is room and board fee, and one is contribution of care fee. The client is the individual, and that individual client is paying two separate fees.
Okay.
One for room and board and one for contribution of care.
If error dates were submitted before August 31st, do we still have to itemize it on Schedule G?
If it was submitted before August 31st?
Yes.
If they were submitted and approved through the process, they would have been paid on the first or second quarter.
Oh,
In the quarter payment.
the person clarified later she meant Schedule H.
Oh, Schedule H, that's the contribution of care.
Okay.
That's in the reconciliation. That gets picked up in the reconciliation. Anything that's on the Schedule H gets picked up in the reconciliation.
Okay, ready for the next one? How should differences in personal supports attendance hours be reported on Schedule G?
There's a calculation in there that
Yeah, it should be the same as with any other. I mean, whatever the difference in hours are, it should be reported the same way. I mean, so if it's you know, if it's a difference of, I don't know, 10 hours or whatever, it should I mean, it should be the same on Schedule G. The same actually 10-hour difference accounts for whatever it is. Just explain what those 10 hours account for.
Which individual it is for.
Which individual, you know, it's associated with, or individuals.
Okay, also, do we have to submit an attested wage survey for FY17?
We have not, that one I'll have to get back. I'm not sure about that. I know we just did the 16 wage surveys a few months ago, but I'm not sure about that. I would ask them to submit that as a question to the website, because you know, that's usually not, we don't usually deal until like May or so, but I'm not sure about what we're doing with 17 just yet.
Okay, I pulled the cost report from off the website. It appears that the date field in Schedule G has not been updated to accept dates in the current year.
Yeah, that was the question you asked before. I'm not sure what that means. We'll have to take a look at that, because I'm not sure what that is, that question. I have to take a look at that. I'm not sure what that represents, because I don't have it open before me here to look at.
When completing the client fee reimbursement report and go to the R&B form, expected contribution is $375, which is pre-populated. This does not agree with my screen just jumped. Does not agree with $12.33.
on Schedule I.
Schedule H.
I think she said Schedule. Yeah.
You said Schedule H.
There's a similar question from another person. Says 1233 times 31 days is $382.23, which is over the $375. And she had asked a question prior.
It's where they have days in a month, right. So they did an average.
It averages out, yeah.
It's an average.
Okay. And provider collects 375. The pieces 2 on 31 days in a month calculates to 382.23. So you subtract out more than the provider collects. Okay, so that's a similar question. Okay, there seems to be a problem in the cost report template. It's Schedule G in the 2017 report. If you have attendance difference, you have to enter a date on Schedule G, attendance reconciliation. But you can't enter a date in FY 2017, only FY 16 or before. And can you look into that? We've asked that question was asked again, so just in a different way. Okay, column D on Schedule G does not accept FY 17 dates, only accepts FY 16 dates. Again, so she asks, would you send out an amended form?
Yes, we'll look at the what the issue is and get it corrected and send out a yes. We will. We'll see what the issue, what the problem is. We'll look at it.
Okay, this is a follow-up question, not a duplicate question. So the cost report must be done on the fiscal year. I understand that, but my organization is on the calendar year. The audit report will be done on the calendar year, and we will do the cost report on the fiscal year. We can submit our calendar year audit report. However, we must submit reconciliation worksheets that reconciles our audit reports to the fiscal year cost report, correct?
As long as it's submitted by this case January the 2nd, 2018, that's fine, but it has to reconcile to our fiscal year.
There's a second part to the question. So the cost report must be done on the fiscal year. I understand that, but my organization is on the calendar year. The audit report will be done on the calendar year, and we will do the cost report on the fiscal year. However, we must submit reconciliation worksheets that reconciles our audit reports to, yeah, I think they duplicated their question. Okay. So that's all the questions we have. And so I just want to make sure that I typed this correctly. If people have further questions, it's DDA.RECONSIATIONS at maryland.gov.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So I think we're ready to end the webinar.
Okay, well, thank you everyone, and we really appreciate you taking time to spend your morning with us to go through this webinar. And as we said before, we will follow up on all those questions you send to the address there as soon as we can. Thanks. Have a good day.